Okay, aloha mai kākou. Let's get started. O wau keia o ka wena komiji no nu'u anu mai au. Ma mua o ka ho'omaka ana e ho'omanaʻo kākou I ka lā kuʻokoʻa o Hawaiʻi nei no ka mea e hiki koke mai I ka lā 22 o Novemapa. No leila eia wau ma mua o ko ke hoʻoia aku nei I ke kuʻokoʻa o keia paiʻaina o Hawaiʻi. I nā kākoʻo ʻoe I kaʻu e kiko ma ka chat. Aloha and welcome to the last session of Hoʻokele Naʻauao 2020. I'm sure by now everyone has heard about Hoʻokele, but we just want to mahalo our sponsors one more time. So of course, Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi loa, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, Hawaii Pacifica. So this year's theme was really centered around the activation of Kaiāulu, really the activation of the Lāhui Hawaii through the Kukiaʻi Mauna and the Aloha Aina social justice movement, social and environmental justice movements. And so we really wanted to center Ho'okele around this idea of community and as library and information science workers, what is our responsibilities around becoming active players in this fight for justice. And so we do encourage you folks, as usual, to engage with each other, engage with the panelists in the chat. We do also ask that you reflect on your kulana and your kuleana, and to really keep this a safe environment for everybody. And if you feel like you're being harassed or you see somebody else being harassed, please let us know and we will handle that. Question and answers, we are prioritizing BIPOC voices. So please, if you self-identify as a person in a marginalized community, start your question with an asterisk so we know to prioritize those. We're also following Dr. Eve Tuck's peer review questions. So before you ask your question, please ask yourself these questions. So I have the privilege today of introducing our last speaker for Hoʻokele Naʻauao 2020, Lessa Kananiʻopua Pelayo-Lozada. So Lessa and I actually met through Twitter, which I guess is very appropriate in this pandemic age. So Jessie Lawyer actually put us together. And so Jessie, if you're on here, or if any of Jessie's friends are on here, please tell her I said mahalo, because honestly, as we think about Kaiāulu and community, a lot of times I feel like kānaka in the diaspora get forgotten because, you know, kānaka here, we're so focused on trying to save Hawaii and save the world that a lot of times we forget about our fellow kānaka that are in the US or in Canada. And I think I saw somebody yesterday that was in the UK. And I just want all the kānaka to know that you are still part of our community. You are still part of the Lāhui. And we really mahalo all the hard work that you folks are doing in the libraries there. So Lessa is one of these people, and I'm so happy that we were put in touch with each other. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce her now. So Lessa Kananiʻopua Pelayo-Lozada is the Adult Services Assistant Manager at the Palos Verdes Library District in Southern California. She is the current Executive Director and a past President of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. In 2012, Lessa co-authored the book Hawaiians in Los Angeles from Arcadia Press. Much of her professional work focuses on services to youth and promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion in libraries, librarianship, and her local community. She lives in San Pedro, California with her husband, Christian Hans Lozada, and their pets. So I'm gonna stop sharing, so Lessa, you can share.
Perfect. Mahalo kawena and aloha mai kako. I want to mahalo those who have come before in the symposium and libraries and our ancestors to bring us here today. But I first want to start off with some talk story. So once when I was a keiki, it was St. Patrick's Day, and I went to my tutu's house for breakfast like I did every day. This was the first year that I learned that you should wear green on St. Patrick's Day or else you get pinched. So of course I wore green, and when I saw my tutu wasn't wearing any, I marched right up to her and pinched her. So anyone here with a tutu, let alone a tutu Mary, can imagine what happened next. I got a slap, of course, but what she said after that changed and molded my outlook on how I would connect to the world. She said that St. Patrick's Day and pinching is for Irish people, and we are Hawaiian. But my mom is part Irish, I said. She is, Tutu agreed, but you are Hawaiian. So fast forward 12 years later, and I'm visiting the Aina for the first time in my memory. Struggles with identity and being Hawaiian enough, as one of the only Hawaiians in my generation I knew, my papa introduced me to everyone on both Maui and Oahu as his akamaiwan. My sister was still a baby, so I got to hold that title. On that trip, I was the one who watched wide-eyed as my cousins killed the pig and prepared it while my brother passed out in the bed of the truck. The one who helped push the van up the hill to see the lo'i because I'd only seen them in my keiki calabash VHS tape. And if you don't know what keiki calabash is, I will gladly share some YouTube links later. I was the one who knew that trips to Hawaii were not to be taken for granted because I'd never been except as a baby until I was 19. And this trip at 19, a family reunion for the Hui Va'a Ohana, just down the road from our family land in Kipahulu, would set the course for my adult path. How I spoke about myself and where I came from, what my career would look like, and how I would move through the world. I hope I can convey what a true honor it is for me to be closing out Ho'okele Naʻauao. As a diaspora Kanaka, born, raised, and still living in Los Angeles on Tongva land, it sometimes feels like my Hawaiianness is a fragile thing, especially now that my tutu and papa are gone. I am lucky to have been raised in a strong Hawaiian community in Southern California. My grandparents helped to establish the largest ho'olalea on the continent, and despite being in California, instilled in us Hawaiian culture, values, and a way of life. One which I didn't realize was different from others' upbringings until I left that strong Hawaiian community. And both my identity and my path became things others could question and feel that they could comment on. An upbringing which brings me here today to share my manaʻo, to share what it's like to often be the only Hawaiian in these spaces, and an upbringing which informs what Hawaiian librarianship means to me. My talk today will be one of the most personal public talks I've given in a professional setting, and I will admit that I am a bit nervous. But deep breath, because I am following Mana Wahine, who set the stage for us to connect together here today as a group. Sandy's comment yesterday that she felt a bit silly describing ways of being that are second nature to her resonated with me. When I was invited to give this talk today, I thought, Hawaiian librarianship, what do I know? I deal directly with the lahui so rarely that I wasn't sure what I could offer everyone. But my husband and my sister pointed out that as Hawaiians, everything I do, everything we do here is Hawaiian librarianship. The way we operate is different. And just because it is second nature to us doesn't mean it isn't radical in the spaces that we occupy, especially in the whiteness that is librarianship. So I've structured my talk today around some of the values I carry with me in professional settings and the role they've played in taking me from the akamaiwan to the first after my grandfather to graduate from college and then grad school, and my journey as a public librarian committed to doing right by her community, but also making the profession do right by our community. Pushing the profession as the only Kanaka in the room and bringing awareness and education has been my primary driver towards my path of becoming the first Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian president of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, and the first Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian on the executive board of the American Library Association. I know this is just my one story as a Hawaiian in the diaspora, and that each of our stories are unique. So mahalo again from the bottom of my pu'uwai to Kavena and Siobhan for inviting me to share and be a part of this group, which I feel I've been searching for my whole career. But before I jump in, I do want to get a sense of you folks attending today and find out what values you hold that inform your practice and library work. So some of the values I'll be talking about today include humility, seeking knowledge, being brave, caring for one another, But I also want to find out what guides us as a group and see where we overlap as we talk story together today. So if you will humor me, please open a browser, head to menti.com and enter the code 8735433 and type in your values. As folks start submitting, you'll see our word cloud here populate, which I'll start reading aloud. And Anne-Marie has also put the information into the chat box to make it a little easier for you. So we started off, I think, with two of our core values, aloha and kuleana. I feel like aloha is at the center of everything that we do. Ha'aha'a, ike, ohana, pono, curiosity, perpetuation, equity, stewardship, inclusion, access, aloha aina, empathy, justice, sharing, care, context, the language of people, skepticism, stewardship, malama, story, navigation, solidarity, compassion, kokua, pilina, access, relationality, kapuna, openness, revolution, myth, heritage, cooperation, liberation, community, voice, knowledge, what I'm seeing is that I'm in very, very good company today. And what I'm seeing gives me a lot of hope, I think, for the future of our profession and frankly, our world and what we're going through right now. We're starting to slow down a little bit, but please keep adding because I want to capture these and I want to share them afterwards. So I'll definitely share them on Twitter and I will share it, I'm sure, as well. But this is filling my heart. And thank you to all of you, mahalo, for sharing and being a part of my presentation today. It is all of these values coming together which will create the true change in our profession. And as Sophia alluded to yesterday, the values of librarianship were founded on that librarianship was founded on and were traditionally used as covert assimilation and exclusion tactics. But I believe that the values we all bring to the profession, especially as Hawaiians and BIPOCs, can bring to life the true meaning of our shared professional values. So I'm going to navigate away here real quick and back to my PowerPoint. But like I said, keep adding, please don't stop. So first for me, ʻImi ike. As the akamai one in the family, or as my cousins would term it, the scary, bossy, smart one, I was the oldest and took care of my younger siblings and cousins as you do when you're the oldest. I feel like this naturally led me to want to be a teacher, but after that trip to Maui and Oahu with my grandfather, my path began to change course. There was so much about our history that I had no idea about, and the course of my study shifted dramatically to incorporating any aspect of Hawaii when I could, as well as documenting my grandparents' oral histories, which at least my grandfather hated, by the way, because he didn't feel he had anything worthwhile to share. The Hawaii that I had been taught by the diaspora community was one where you did what you had to do for your family and your community, and you did it the best you could. That included joining the military and leaving Hawaii to raise your family because you couldn't afford it back home, and dreaming for decades of finally getting Hawaiian homeland and returning. That Hawaii I learned about in the diaspora also included creating an idealized version of Hawaii for your children and grandchildren, so that they would be nothing but proud of their roots, but not realizing that pride comes in many forms. This is the lens that I grew up with, one not too far off from stereotypes, despite my grandmother growing up in 1930s Papakolea and only going to school up to 9th grade. and my grandfather's family struggling to hang on to their land in Kipahulu, which he finally succeeded in just after he got his own Hawaiian homestead in Lahaina, after 40 years on a list and not too long before his death. The Hawaii I visited certainly had these idealistic qualities, but I also saw firsthand the struggle and felt the pull of what was lost because of colonization and what was being rediscovered and rejuvenated thanks to those who knew continuing down this path wasn't the only way. Seeking this knowledge and exploring it is actually what drove me to libraries. The research part of it, the discovery of information, and the radicalness of what can happen when one is armed with the right tools. I wanted future generations to have this information at their fingertips, no matter where they grew up. I wanted it to be a part of the narrative of our ancestors and their struggles and how we came to be. Ha'aheo. As I went through library school though, as I'm sure is or was the case for many of you, there weren't many Hawaiians. In trying to find my community in library school, I was taken under the wing of a Filipino librarian, Eloisa Bora, who worked on campus at UCLA and brought all the Filipino LIS students together, all 4 of us, which included UCLA staff, for pizza and mentoring once a quarter. We had a lot of awkward moments when I tried to explain that while, yes, Melencio Pelayo was from the Philippines, when he got to Hawaii and married Hoʻokele Naʻauao, the family was all Hawaiian. I wasn't trying to diss my Filipino side, I just didn't know much about it. That group that she brought together though would be a bedrock for me through library school and beyond, creating my Asian Pacific American network, a part of my identity I never really needed to express before because I was Hawaiian. After my first year of library school in 2008, ALA conference was held in my backyard in Anaheim, and Dr. Lorian Roy was ALA's first Native American president, a member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe and enrolled on the White Earth Reservation. During her conference, she drew upon amplifying the voices of and bringing to ALA many Indigenous voices, including Hawaiians. And let me tell you, I'm not sure a poster session has ever made a bigger impact on a person than it did to me. There were 2 poster sessions in particular, one from Kamehameha Schools featuring Gail Fujimoto and Kavika Makanani, and one featuring Alulike with Keikilani Meyer. Both posters featured the types of services they provided students and patrons, examples of materials in Hawaiian, histories of their institutions. As the granddaughter of a Kamehameha alum, I was of course excited and proud to share that connection with them. And as a Hawaiian, seeing services made specifically for us showed me that there was a literal place for us in libraries. I doubt any of them will remember me, but I remember that the conversations I had with them about the importance of ensuring Hawaiians are represented in libraries, no matter where we grew up or where we live, gave me the energy to keep going. I had just been denied a Spectrum Scholarship. I didn't see a place for myself in the group I just joined, the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, APALA, and I sure as heck didn't see myself in ALA. I didn't see myself in libraries until these Hawaiian librarians, never knowing me, saw me, like really saw me. They told me I was enough and I needed to do this for my ohana and my ancestors and that I would find my place. These conversations and the strength they gave me helped me get through that second year of graduate school as I wrote my thesis, Ho'omau, the Perpetuation of Hawaiian Culture in Southern California, which looked at how Hawaiians in, you guessed it, Southern California, perpetuate our culture through information access points, not necessarily books and paper, but through civic clubs, lei making, ho'olalea, hula, backyard plants, and so much more. This thesis would later become the foundation for the book Hawaiians in Los Angeles, which is a brief photographic look at the history of the Hawaiian community in LA starting in the 70s. So I accepted the challenge from these Kanaka librarians in my research and in my work. I looked for my place and my peeps, and I looked to create community. Although I initially felt like I didn't have a place in APALA, that Filipino lunch group persisted, and a colleague I met through it, Jade Albero, pushed me to get more involved in APALA and to work on a new grant opportunity, Talk Story. Talk Story was a presidential initiative of Camila Alire, ALA president 2 years after Dr. Roy. It was the middle of the recession. I couldn't get a full-time job if my life depended on it, and it kind of did. And I needed something to make me feel like I didn't waste 2 years of my life on a degree in a profession that didn't seem to love me back. So I worked on this project initially to contribute a Hawaiian cultural story time, but became a lead, developing an annual grant with community funding, which continues to fund Asian Pacific American programming to this day. Through this project, I met other Hawaiian librarians across the country and provided support to Hawaiian civic clubs in places like Kentucky, trying to perpetuate and keep our culture alive wherever Hawaiians are. And on a personal level, I learned that while paying gigs didn't think I had something to contribute, I actually had a lot to give. I met amazing people who saw what I could contribute, saw that my passion was genuine, and who became my ohana. I also opened myself up to non-professional cultural exploration and let the mana guide me. The library I was a page at also had a kānaka who worked as a clerk. His mom had a hoʻike, and he invited me and my husband to it. As the universe would have it, his mom danced for my dad's kumu, and my kumu from the whole 6 months I danced hula when I was 5. I had time on my hands, was missing being a part of the larger Hawaiian community, and what better way to fill those longings than with halau. My halau, Kaulana Kahalekula o Nā Pua o Ka'aina, under the direction of Kumuhula Randy Kaulana Ching, rooted me and reminded me every day why I wanted to do work and why I wanted to share information. Because I was learning so much about our mo'olelo and history for the first time and learning in this context, it helped me establish skills that would be necessary in my job, like programming and planning and getting people on board that no grad school could. Kiahiahi yesterday talked about how her identity and being a hula dancer are part of her and a way of life, the same as librarianship, and I share that identity on multiple levels. During this time, I had a poster session called Librarianship as a Lifestyle Choice, but really it was a way of life. It was my calling. What I was looking for within that calling was where my kuleana fit in and where I fit in. So I became a yes person. The yeses that I had explored opened me up to opportunities I wouldn't have been brave enough to explore myself. But with folks pushing and encouraging me and those yeses, I have been able to infuse my upbringing and worldview into everything I do. Pono, which seems like a good thing, right? That's why I'm here, to share with you all my views on Hawaiian librarianship. But there is also gray area that I'm sure you all know where to be pono can honestly be challenging. As Sophia talked about yesterday, whiteness in our profession is pervasive, and subscribing to whiteness often seems like the only way forward and to get ahead. And as Abigail shared with us this morning, and as I think we all feel when we walk into a room of whiteness, we have to prove ourselves, and doing so zaps our energy, exhausting us. It is one thing to bring your Hawaiian values and worldview into your job, but it is another to be BIPOC and to be Hawaiian in a white profession. There is a constant pull between doing what you need to do to just get the job done, which was much of my upbringing. And there's also honoring who you are and being pono. From the length of my hair to the jewelry I wear to my clothing, I am constantly navigating the intersectionality of race, age, gender, others' perceptions. No lie, and probably unsurprising, but I found that when I dressed and looked more professional, AKA when I looked whiter, I had easier experiences. One of the decisions I had to make was what name to go by. In school, I went by Lessa. At home and in the Hawaiian community, I went by Kanani or Nani. It was always an easy choice to figure out which name to use until my personal and professional world started melding. There was a time where I wondered if I should start going by Nani for everything, but it wasn't who I was. I was Nani, but I was also Lessa, and my screen names and such had always been Lessa Nani. So I made the decision to just put my whole name on there, navigate teaching people how to say all my names, normalizing our olelo where I could, and feeling comfortable with my decision and being confident enough to know that I was still Hawaiian because I am Hawaiian. And there is no amount of whitening my name to not feel pono about that. My name, of course, still kicked off questions of, are you Hawaiian? When did you move to California? And a quick education on what being Native Hawaiian means versus being from Hawaii. But when my hair was pulled back into a low bun or straightened and not left in its natural state or in a tita bun on top, people focused on what I said rather than my appearance. There were less microaggressions and people asking me about what the latest craze poke was. And while I enjoyed the less microaggressions part, it felt gross. It didn't feel pono. I was lucky to have a mentor who saw this struggle, and as an Asian American woman with roots in Hawaii, had at least some understanding of what I was going through. She helped me and set an example for when you just need to navigate the whiteness and when you have a little leeway. And when you hit a certain point, it's not even leeway. You can let your hair down, literally, and be. One of the conversations we had was about the length of my hair. I've always had long hair, whether or not I danced hula. It was a part of me and my identity. The shortest I've ever cut it was shoulder length, which the hairdresser said was still long. And I was like, did you see the 15 inches you just cut off? But anyway, but my mentor indicated that the length of my hair contributes to my youthfulness, as well as grossly my exoticization. She said she understood if I needed it long for hula, and Kumu said no, but it is something to consider. I considered it and considered against cutting my hair, as it is, like I said, part of who I am, but do more often put it into a bun, and disappointingly, like I said, it seems to work. I wish I could say that I act, speak, and look exactly how I want all the time, but I have had to make choices based upon the desired outcome. What will do the most good for the most people? How can I have my voice heard now so that I can then educate and get us all to the point where we have to worry less about how we look and how we sound and more on the bigger picture of what we're saying and what we're trying to do. When I first started doing more work within ALA and outside of Apala, I would finish the day exhausted. And the only place that I could find comfort was in a meeting with people where I did have to put on a front and didn't have to act in a certain way. And it was then that I realized how much of my energy was being zapped, and I couldn't continue and needed to bring more of myself to all of the work and not save it. The way I've been able to do this is to be pono in all that I do and trust that we will get there, and be thankful for the folks who challenge us to not play this game at all and be all the time, and the allies who lift us up and get out of the way so we can bring our ways of knowing and practice to the big table. I am thankful for this work together, for the different angles and approaches that this work together can do to make real change. Ala Kaina. My confidence in who I am, where I come from, and seeing the void of Kanaka at national levels is what I think has pushed me to become the first Pacific Islander and Hawaiian in these professional settings. Whenever I am denied something, it is my desire to come back stronger than what might have been and to bring others with me, building bridges, connections, and understanding. The first time someone called this leadership, I was confused because ala kaina just is to me. It is what I saw my grandparents do to build the Hawaiian community in Southern California. And it is what I assumed everyone does. Much like malama, we malama each other, we malama the aina, and we bring it all together. When I am in these spaces as the only Kanaka, I feel the weight of representing an entire people that half the people in the room don't even realize exist. I feel the weight of educating, breaking stereotypes, and bringing folks together in a way that I'm not sure everyone in that room does. One of the things that kept me sticking around Apala was that I felt these values reflected in the group, even if we all came from different backgrounds. We supported one another and we worked toward a common goal together. In my work with Talk Story, I also felt this affinity in my work with the American Indian Library Association. More connections and people who wanted to do good work together for a cause bigger than all of us put together, with knowledge systems and ways of life different than those in ALA. That isn't to say, of course, that Apala, for instance, isn't without its faults. Reminding folks that not all of our ancestors were immigrants, and that yes, my white side was immigrant, but not in the way that matters when talking about marginalized communities. And my Hawaiian side was colonized can be exhausting. Writing a book chapter and having the Pacific part taken out of my work, leaving it as Asian American without my permission, was also frustrating and frankly one of the angriest moments I have had as a professional. Trying to figure out if we should say I'm the first Pacific Islander anything or the first Native Hawaiian or both. I felt like Kamala Harris as folks worked to encourage and support and represent me properly. And none of us were even sure where to start because we were at the first. It did not start at being cited as Pacific Islander American though. It was Pacific Islander. Feeling like the token Pacific in Apala does flare up every so often, even now. But as Apala grows and learns, the mistakes lessen. Other Kanaka and Pacific Islanders also feel more welcome, and I am not alone in Apala. Making sure we are represented, even if I know I can't represent the issues of Hawaiian librarians in Hawaii firsthand, I hope opens the door so that others will seek out the knowledge, expertise, and manaʻo of those in our occupied Aina and really listen to what folks have to offer. When I was Apala president, I was hoping for a campaign to get more Kanaka as members. But speaking with Hawaii librarians, and when I learned that the issues facing our Hawaii librarians are often different than what we are facing on the continent. But I think there is also still a lot that is the same. And I hope we can figure out how to leverage the mana we have in both places to support each other where we are. Whenever I see another Hawaiian librarian or library worker, I'm excited, usually pretty shy, and want to learn and know more, which is why groups like Nā Hawaiʻi are important. Hawaiian librarianship to me is about inclusion, but it is also about elevating and supporting ourselves inward. So as I continue, I want to just pause for a second to hear what Hawaiian librarianship means to you all. I know not everyone attending today is Kanaka, so I'm also interested in hearing what librarianship in connection to your identity means. I know it'll be hard to synthesize it, but since I'm a visual person, I'd like to just do another quick Menti. So if you'll all open the browser again real quick to menti.com, put in the code 7131910, and we'll spend just a few minutes sharing with each other what Hawaiian librarianship or Samoan librarianship or Maori librarianship, Indigenous librarianship mean to us. I also encourage you to put into the chat what type of librarianship you're sharing with us and where you are coming from. So our types of librarianship mean to us making connections, health, acceptance, paving a way for my child, language revitalization, being Hawaii-centered, humility, pono, by Kanaka, kapuna-based, sacred, kulana, connections, pride, protection, getting out of the way. Somebody's been listening. Language revitalization, ao consciousness, malama of cultural, coming home, allyship, acknowledgements, decolonization, honoring culture, making connections, love, aloha, acknowledgements, humility, being at ease, resiliency, protecting our mo'olelo, normalizing olelo Hawaii, sharing native ike, connecting the diaspora, friendship, 7 generations, another beautiful word cloud that I think reflects that our values are rooted in our librarianship. Mahalo again for sharing these insights, and continue please again to add your thoughts and what librarianship means to you. For like our values, these words guide us and fulfill us, and they bring us together as a community. We right now are a community together. Switch back over here. Which leads me to lokahi. Hawaiian librarianship in the diaspora is being entrenched in equity, diversity, and inclusion for all BIPOC. Because our numbers are small, advocating and being an ally to others, especially our fellow Indigenous and Black Ohana, is where the strength of our values lie and has been the main focus of my work in APALA and ultimately ALA. We are only as strong as our weakest person, and supporting each other is the best way to get there. I know that at least a few folks here were at the 2018 Joint Conference of Librarians of Color. And I gotta tell you that of all the projects I have worked on in my career so far, this conference is one that I am the proudest of. All 5 of the National Associations of Librarians of Color came together to put on a multi-day conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. All of the proceeds from the event were reinvested directly back into the associations to support our members and our communities. And the vibe of that conference was power, love, and centering our experiences. Seeing where our experiences are similar and seeing where they are different and how we can better support, for instance, our Black colleagues and move towards an anti-racist profession, not just an institution, is at the core of what our professions and our associations need to be doing. The unity that we felt was even evident in the things we didn't get quite right in JCLC. We wanted to be inclusive of all races, ethnicities, genders, identities, sexual orientations, socioeconomic classes, and abilities, and more. And when we missed the mark, the steering committee stopped, listened, apologized, and tried to make it right, setting the example for what I hope all things can be in the future. We can't all know everything, and only by working together can we even really know anything. Ha'a ha'a. This admission, I feel, that we can't know everything and be everything and do everything is seen as a weakness in many circles, certainly many of the ones that I run in. But ha'a, humility, humbleness is probably one of the most important values that I keep close to my heart and is one that I think sets us as Hawaiians apart. We are, of course, not the only culture to value humbleness, but this combined with our other values sets us up to be compassionate, empathetic leaders who continue to grow and learn. As a member of the ALA Executive Board, I was high enough on the excitement of getting to have a big seat at the table that I volunteered for the impossible task, assessing ALA and determining if change was needed. The answer seemed pretty obvious, and it was yes, ALA needs change and lots of it, especially in its governance structure. There are so many systemic barriers to participation that it's hard to know where to begin. But that first volunteer effort as a board member led to an appointment as chair of the Steering Committee on Organizational Effectiveness, often referred to as SCOE. That committee, over the course of 2 years, spoke to thousands of ALA members and provided a 60-page recommendation on how ALA can improve on its strengths and commit to real change to reduce barriers to participation and open the association to better and more fulfilling member engagement. Getting through those 2 years, I will tell you, was not easy. When I accepted the appointment, I had no idea what awaited me, but I quickly met very passionate members who passionately told me all the ways that what I and the committee was doing was wrong, backhanded, undemocratic, and an insult to our profession. Had I had a bigger ego, or had I had one singular vision for what the outcome of our work could be or how to get there, the whole thing might have blown up and been over practically before it even began. But instead, I took it with humility to improve, to challenge our group to do better, and to model the type of work and association we want to see ALA become in the future. I started doing that work in what I thought was the right way, but I ended doing that work in what I knew was the right way, the Hawaiian way. While the work of SCOE ended with the report, the work of reorganizing ALA continues forward, and I hope in the next year or two will be more or less solidified. And while the large structural changes take formal votes and bureaucracy to run through before they can take effect, there are smaller cultural shifts that have already begun because we, as ALA members and the non-ALA members, have challenged ourselves to do better, think differently, and be humble. ALA is not perfect, but by opening itself up to newer and different voices such as mine and many of my colleagues I served with on what was literally the most diverse board ever, I am hopeful that it can become the association we need it to be today and reflect the libraries that we have now, including Hawaiian libraries and Hawaiian librarianship, not the elitist ones of 100 years ago. Kuleana. My kuleana, and I think the kuleana of many, if not all of us here today, as from what I've seen in the chat in the word cloud, is one of service and responsibility to the Lōhui and our communities. Mine took me a while to figure out, as you can see from the pieces I shared with you today. I wasn't sure how I could best help support and grow our community, but advice from Kehaulani Kaunui and Analu Josephides, both separately, helped me understand that my kuleana didn't have to be necessarily in academia or physically in Hawaii. For now, I see it as being on a national stage and shouting our work, your work, and the work of other BIPOC folk from the rooftops. As I look to the future and wonder what the best use of my skills are at each stage, it alters slightly, as I'm sure it does for you as well. As Abigail said earlier, our healing and our ike and our journeys are not linear, they are cyclical. I am embarking on a potential new adventure soon, and it is driven by my kuleana for us and my ancestors. And while the roots don't change, the journey to get there may. Whether it is opening access to resources, integrating our indigenous ways of knowing into structures, being the only one in the room, standing on the mauna to protect it, or bringing together a group of Hawaiians to talk story and support one another, our kuleana is possibly the most important value we can have in this profession. Queen Kapiolani's Olela no Eau, Kulia I Kanu'u, stays with me through everything I do and everywhere I go. Striving through hard work for excellence is what we do as Hawaiians, as BIPOCs, as members of our community. My family was not one rooted in activism. We were one rooted in survival and celebration. And that rooting got us pretty far, if I do say so myself. The blood and spirit that run through my veins keep me going. The no-nonsense Tita that was a bouncer for a club, as well as my great-grandmother, and the family that helped take care of our Aina long before owning and selling were part of our lexicon, are what informed Hawaiian librarianship for me. Hawaiian librarianship is one inherently of activism. It looks different to each of us depending on our subject expertise, where we are, who we are serving, but it is all rooted in the same values and desire to do better and be better and continuously grow and improve. The work that I have read about and heard about Hawaiians doing for our Lōhui is inspiring work that should be shouted from the rooftops and funded to kingdom come. The work that we do as Hawaiian librarians is rooted in honoring where we came from and ensuring that our oral traditions are not lost but preserved, that the legacies of those who came before us live on in those who come after us, and that we malama and take care of one another. So I end with Kulia I Kanu'u and mahalo to those who have helped me on my own journey, and it helped advance us to where we are today as Hawaiian librarians. Mahalo to you all for having me here today and sharing with me. I look forward to continuing to build relationships between the Lōhui on the continent and the Aina and doing the work necessary. And if you ever want to contact me or talk story, I've got my contact info here, but I'm pretty easy to find. So mahalo.
Mahalo, Lessa. I just, you know, some of us here don't, I told you this, but some of us here don't belong to ALA because we don't identify as being American, but we are just really proud. Like, this is huge for the Lāhui Hawaii to have a Hawaiian that's nominated in such a powerful position in a huge organization. So we're just really proud of you, and we back you in, you know, in spirit. We can't vote because we don't belong, but we back you in spirit, and we're just really proud. We're really proud of you.
Thank you. It means a lot. And honestly, I understand. I mean, ALA is a tough cookie. The American part is a tough situation to crack. And so just knowing that I have all of you folks with me is more than enough. Thank you.
So if you have any questions for Lessa, please feel free to drop it in the chat or use the Q&A feature. I have a question. How do you think that we as Kanaka that are in the Pai'aina and those that are in the States or elsewhere, how can we work more together? Because, you know, we're in the same fields, we're working against the same systems and society. So how do you think we can work more together?
I think that it's a lot easier for us to work together now than I think it was when I first became a librarian. You know, thanks to, it's not situations like this, but thanks to things like Zoom, I think that we can make those connections so that we can share, you know, whether it's having just, you know, like meetings or happy hours or what, you know, I really think that we can support each other in our work and see where those crosses come. And I think it just starts with talking with one another and finding each other. That's really the hard part, right? Is the finding each other. I mean, it's how long on Twitter for us to find each other. And I was so thankful that it happened. And I think that something is happening that is bringing us all together right now. And we really have to just take that and run with it.
What advice do you have for both Kanaka here and in the US or wherever they may be, who are working in libraries or going to library school, and oftentimes they're the only ones in their whatever programs, or, you know, even here it's the same here. So I guess what advice would you give those people?
I think it's find whatever allies you can, right? You know, Kiahiahi yesterday talked about how sometimes it's easier to work with non-Hawaiians, right? And sometimes your allies don't have to be exactly, you know, like you, but they have to understand you. And I think that we can find folks and allies within our communities and within our LIS programs. And if we can't, there are now so many resources for us to be able to find those folks who we can vent to and who we can seek advice from. You know, there's groups like We Here that really help the broader BIPOC community. And there's lots of different groups, you know, like even APALA or AILA and the ethnic affiliates, you know, those helped me, but those also I know can help other people. And so I think that part of the work that we need to do as current professionals is making those resources known to library school students. You know, library school is so overwhelming when folks come in and as they're navigating their different identities and what even type of library they want to work in and what's the right fit for them, to add on top, you know, do you want to volunteer to work with us? No, they don't want to volunteer to work with us. They want somebody that they can talk to. And I think that making ourselves available to be those places where students can go is really important.
Okay, so we have a question here. Can you share more about the role of research in Kalahui for the Lahui?
So I am not as much rooted in research anymore since I graduated from library school. I've been very rooted in practice. But I think that the ways that we do research needs to be shared out as much as possible with other communities so that they can understand that the way that research is being done. Like for instance, I read the paper that you folks just put out, you know, last year. It was eye-opening, right? That the way that you folks identified how research is being done in the Hawaiian community is the way that I do research as a Hawaiian in the diaspora, right? But I didn't have a language or any other examples for how it is done. And so I think that the role of us to do as much research as we can and to share it out is root at one of the roots of how we can begin to grow and really support the needs of our community.
Okay, we've got a really good question here. So you talked a lot about your relationship with your tutu. What do you want to see for your mo'opuna when you become a tutu?
I would love for my mo'opuna to walk into a space and not be the only ones, to never feel alone, and to also be able to walk into any space that they want to, right? I think that, you know, My grandparents, they didn't have, you know, necessarily the education or the language or any of that to share with us, but what they shared were the values. And so what I hope that we can share, that I can share with my mo'opuna, is the values plus, right? To give them everything else and to let them know that they are the valued people in the room and that they have a voice to give and to share.
Sorry, we have the eco lights here.
It's okay, my cat's been scratching at the door the whole time. So.
Yep. Okay, can you talk more about the barriers to access from your perspective as a Kanaka living in California? What are the barriers to access to ʻIke, Hawaii, or Hawaiian knowledge in general?
I think the barrier to access is partially knowing where to even start. You know, I feel, I mean, I don't know, but you know, like in Hawaii, colleges and libraries have Pacifica collections that you can go and use to research, a Pacifica librarian that's attached to that. Here, you know, I didn't have that, and I didn't even know where to start, for instance, to begin working on my thesis. You know, I kind of left out that we had the Asian American Studies department at UCLA got its first Pacific Islander faculty member, you know, and Keith, but just even knowing where to start is a huge barrier. And then feeling like also you have to go to Hawaii to be able to do a lot of the research, right? So there's economic barriers. You know, one of the reasons that I never got to Hawaii until I was a teenager was an economic barrier. You know, my parents couldn't afford to take us, kind of thing. So I think that those are two really strong ones. And when you're the first in your family to go to college, you know, you also don't know what resources there are just in general. And so these are just barriers that I think a lot of us face as first generation students, but also as having all of our, most of, if not all, our cultural knowledge concentrated into one place that sometimes can be impossible to get to.
Okay, what message do you have for Kanaka who may be interested in or thinking about becoming a librarian or archivist?
What advice did you say?
What
Sorry.
message, yeah, or advice?
Oh, message. What message is to do it. You know, the thing is this profession is hard. It's not easy. You know, there's a panel that I just saw that came in today that's called Why I Left Libraries, right? And it's folks who found other professions but leveraged the skills. But I think that if you can find a support network, I think that if you can find resources to help pay for your education as well. I know I wouldn't be here today either without scholarships from the Hawaii's Daughters Guild of Southern California, from the ahahuis that are here. The community will support you. I think you just have to reach out and be open and, you know, no shame, right? Like I go through it. I don't want to ask people, I don't want to bother people, but it's no bother, right? We're here to help you and we want to help you succeed and to be the future of the profession. So no shame and come find us.
So speaking of community, is there any other thoughts maybe you'd like to share on community, either like finding and building community connections, or it's like joining a community of librarians or community in general?
And community is the most important thing that we have. Community is what keeps us going, what gives us the, you know, the power to go through everything, to go through the profession and to go through life. So without community, I don't know how folks do it. And so whether you have to build that community yourself, whether you have to find people to drag into being part of your community, or you have to put yourself into a community, there are people there who want you to be part of it. So just wherever you can, however you can, and maybe it's not a professional community that keeps you going, right? You know, for a long time, it was my halau that was my community that was helping to keep me going until I was able to find these other places. So, and the community might be your ohana, your community, you know, might be your coworkers. The community can be built anywhere.
Well, mahalo nui to you, Lessa, for Just so everybody's on the same page, Lessa accepted my invitation like really late because we weren't connected until really late. And so as soon as I messaged her, she was like, I'm in, whatever you guys need. And we met over Zoom and it was great. And I just really mahalo you for your time. And we wish you the best of luck on your ALA campaign. Whatever you need, we're here. Just email us. You know us now.
Thank you. I look forward to continuing conversations.
Okay, so this was our last panel for Hoʻokele Naʻauao 2020. And so we'd like to mahalo again all our speakers that we've had over the past 2 days. So when Siobhan and I were thinking about a theme for this year's Hoʻokele Naʻauao, it actually came very naturally, and it was the way that everything fell into place. I really believe our kupuna were handling that part of it, or our ancestors were handling it, because we had to work for it. But the way our speakers lined up, it just, everybody talked in their own ways about the same things. So we really were driven by experiences and stories of aloha aina, those of our kupuna and our own stories, especially within this past few years of kukiaʻi mauna. We wanted to make visible the continued resistance and resiliency of the Lāhui Hawaiʻi and recenter ourselves in the activation of this Kaiāulu. So all our speakers for Hoʻokele Naʻauao, they talked about the same things in their own ways. So we saw pilina and moʻokuauhau, or relationality and genealogy, ea, which in Hawaiian is both breath and sovereignty, moʻolelo, so histories and stories. And these values and concepts really resonate with us here in Hawaii, and we hope that you also found meaning in these stories and teachings as well. I think as we've all experienced here over the past 2 days, some of these conversations are uncomfortable, they might be triggering, but talking about historical trauma and grappling with the oppressive systems, it's heavy stuff. We hope though that you were able to find professional and personal responsibilities, especially as caretakers of knowledge and as members of whatever community you belong to. We really hope that you continue to onipa'a and do the hard work that really addresses the oppression of and the injustices against Indigenous peoples and Black people and other people of color. So as we bring Ho'okele 2020 to a close, we invite you to sit with and reflect on the stories and experiences shared throughout the symposium. We again ask that each of you reflect deeply on your kulana and your kuleana, or your positionality and your privileges and responsibilities. And as you locate yourself, please answer the following question. Who are you responsible to? What are you responsible for? What power and agency do library workers have over knowledge? What are our obligations to ourselves, to our communities, to disrupt systems of oppression in LIS and in the world? Of course, we're not going to solve all of these. Maybe we're not going to even find all the answers to these questions in the short time that we have, but we really hope that you all continue to have these conversations and continue to move forward, the healing backwards and forward from where you're at. So me ke aloha aina, a me ke aloha Lāhui Hawaiʻi, mahalo iā ʻoukou pakahia pau, no ka hele ana mai I ke ia hoʻike o Hoʻokele Naʻauao. Mahalo to you all for attending Hoʻokele Naʻauao. Mahalo for being patient with us as we learned how to use Zoom webinar. Aloha.